the questions I asked was, what's required to phase out fossil fuels? How big is the existing system? What do fossil fuels do for us? What are the primary tasks of the green transition? And then wind and solar, what do they need? What's the quantity of metal needed to construct a complete system that completely replaces everything? And can recycling supply this quantity, and can mining supply this quantity? And if that won't work, what will? And this is where we're leading to what we call the purple transition. So I asked the basic question, will the green transition work for all of us the way we think? Well, how do we continue to resource this? So there are 3 maps. So this is the first map of the work done, where on the left we've got the fossil fuels, then the major tasks. Then if we were to knock them out and replace them with different things that are not fossil fuels, how do we get to the end? So what were the physical tasks in 2018? What was the true scope of work done? Useful work. Assemble a series of non-fossil fuel systems like wind turbines, solar panels, batteries, what have you, to do the same thing. Calculate the extra electrical power needed. And then using an energy mix proposed by the IEA for 2050, how many new stations will we need? Like how many solar panels are we going to need to do this? And so on. So, and the elephant in the room was the power buffer for wind and solar is actually much larger than we think. And that is a problem. And until we solve that problem, wind and solar are not viable as the primary energy solution going forward. They're a support system.
You make this case about the power buffer, which is that wind sometimes goes away for weeks at a time, and it's spread out through an entire region. So if the UK is wind powered and the winds die in the UK, it's entirely possible that the winds also die in Germany and France and Belgium all at the same time. And so these countries can't trade grid backup between each other. And so instead of having 6 or 7 hours of buffer, you were talking about needing like 2 to 4 weeks of buffer.
Yeah, and in fact, the real number could be closer to 12 weeks. And so, so this is the problem. So 1.4 billion vehicles traveled 16 trillion kilometers in 2018. We need something like an extra 50,000 terawatt hours of power, which is like 800,000 used power stations. Put this in context, in 2018, we produced and consumed 26,652 terawatt hours. So it's, roughly half that. And the power plant fleet was 46,423. So we're talking about more than 10 times the power stations to do this. And this is, if we took out a single coal-fired power station, how many solar panels do we need to replace it? That's what that is. So this is an audit of an energy grid in America called PJM RTO. They manage like 100 million people. And so this is like a full year audit for wind and solar. And this was, and then you get onto the website and download this information. And so what I found was that wind and solar underperformed for 4 to 6 months of the year consistently. Like for several months in a row, things were a problem. Like we were below par, and they were at different times, like seasonally different times. Like winter, when you really want to spend a lot of power heating buildings, you've got very poor solar performance. And so this suggests the idea that conventional thinking that 6 or 7 hours is enough to balance the difference between winter and summer is ridiculous. So, so here's like a case study in Spain of concentrated solar power for June and November, like summer and winter. If this was a standalone system, it would be 670 megawatts, and you would need the dark orange things on the graph here is from storage. So for the month of November alone, they would need 16 days of buffer capacity, and they'd need to store it for about 4 to 6 months. Right. So this is
it's a lot of flywheels.
Right. So, yeah, well, flywheels have their place. They all have their place. But we don't have the ability to store such a lot of power for such a long period of time. Like, can you have a flywheel spinning and keep that power for 6 months and come back in 6 months and have that power still accessible? Right. So the second system, now that we know how much extra power we need, how many physical units, how much steel, hydrogen, ammonia production annually, what's the metal content of each wind turbine and solar panel and what have you? What battery capacity needs to be operating? What is the market share of the different battery chemistries that's possibly going to happen in 2050? And what's the metal content of each chemistry? So that gets us to the total metal quantity required.
Mm.
And so when we got that, how do we get it? So now we know how much metal. So where do we get it from? Can recycling deliver? And can the existing mining industry deliver? The answer is no. Can we expand quickly, like falling back on mineral reserves? Or can we, for example, look at mine resources? Or here's a really dumb idea: can we mine the seafloor? Or do we consider developing a fundamentally different plan? And that's actually the answer. So where this goes...
Why is the seafloor dumb, by the way? We had a lady a long time ago present a really interesting plan for just scooping up these balls of metal that are...
The polymetallic nodules. But I think
so the metal is down
Simon
there,
makes the point that it's not enough.
Mm.
The metal is down there. We don't know enough about enough metal, but to mine something like, enough of that order to deliver, say, 20 million tons of copper a year to the market, think of the sediment pollution that would then impact the ocean and what that would do to what's left of the wildlife down there. That's the problem.
Gotcha.
The environmental impact of mining. You can mine in a small volume in a boutique fashion, but now start pulling 3,000 tons an hour off one site.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty much the rest of the fish gone.
Right. So what you're looking at here is the numbers for there's 4 buffer sizes for wind and solar. 6 hours is what the conventional thinking believes, all the way out to 12 weeks. So 6 hours, 48 hours, 28 days, and 12 weeks. Then you got on the left-hand side the mining production of the global mining industry in 2019, the last year before COVID, the last year of sensible data. So let's pull out copper. How many years of production do we need to actually hit to produce enough copper to build the buffer? So if it's 6 hours, it's about 12 years. That we could do. But if the real number is between 28 days, which is 254 years, or 12 weeks, which is 745 years, right, the scale of the problem is unprecedented. And we want to get it done in 25 years, by 2050. So let me just cut to the chase. Right, so what you're looking at here, I presented this slide to the UN and the audience clapped.
There's, for those that are listening, there's a giant bull defecating in the corner that's crossed out while it pulses.
No bullshit plan, yeah. So the graph, that's a bit of a distraction, sorry about that. So the graph graphically shown is you've got the amount of metal you need for the 4 different scenarios based on the buffer. And then you've got the grey, white, and black column next to it for reserves, resources, and what's under the sea. And the amount of metal that we know on planet Earth, like the amount of metal that we know of, the copper, nickel, lithium, cobalt, vanadium, and graphite are far, far, far less than the amount of metal we need to produce enough units to maintain our existing capacity as it was in 2018. So that's just to stand still, 4 or 5 years in the past. So what I'm saying is this is not possible. It's never going to be possible. We've got to go back to the drawing board and do something fundamentally different.
And I mean, it's a shortfall. So if the 12-week buffer is what's actually necessary to power the entire world with wind and solar, the shortfall is enormous. It's like a 4.5x shortfall of copper alone, and then the other rare minerals are even, much greater shortfalls. So the case that you're making is basically, if the green transition is planned to be exclusively wind and solar, we literally do not have the material resources that are necessary in order to even begin to make it work the way that we expect electricity to work right now, which is to not have 3 hours of power a day.
Wind,
and then no
solar,
power for
hydro, nuclear, geothermal, biomass, like the split proposed by the IEA. Now, you could say that we're going to make batteries out of something else other than lithium, even though the rest of the world is determined to focus on lithium. They refuse to look at anything else. Like you can make them out of sodium or the fluoride in your toothpaste, but each of those batteries will still need copper, probably nickel, probably graphite. Right. So what I'm saying here is the plan is fundamentally flawed. Go back to the drawing board. Do something else. So that's the.
So now we can talk about what else we can do.
Yeah. So before we move on to that, do you have any curly questions?
I mean, I think that the questions that I have are largely focused around implementation of the solution, because the arguments for we were talking in the pre-show, I just finished Ed Conway's Material Worlds. I read Smill's Energy and Civilization. We had Nate Hagens on the podcast. And so a lot of these questions that we're talking about right now, we've established in one form or another on the show.
The problem
as
is
being
real.
possible. Yeah, the problem is real.
So I find myself in this odd situation where I'm blazing a trail between tribes out into the middle of nowhere,
And
where I'm
everybody
now
hates
proposing
you.
a solution. And people prefer to hear about doom. They don't want to hear solutions. They're more comfortable hearing that there's a problem.
Yes,
And they
we
tend to
found.
get quite
What is that? What is that? Because we find that all the time. Like, people love hearing themselves talk about what the problems are.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, well, what should we do about that? And they're like,
They're like, we're screwed. Yeah.
It's the mechanics of hope and the mechanics of I've now got to get off my butt and do something. Right. So if we say we're screwed, well, nothing we can do. We can have a good whinge about how terrible the world is and how bad everyone else is and how superior morally we are. If we were in charge, it would be different. And but it's not, and nothing we can do. But hold the phone. If there is a solution, I've got to change my behavior to make it happen. Oh, I don't know about that.
oh yes,
It's so surprising. It's a surprising aspect of human nature to me, because I'll follow anybody who has a great idea about what to do. I don't understand why people are jumping on these people with zero solutions. It's very strange to me.
I think
it's entertaining.
I think we've been conditioned to, on one hand, the number of people I come across in an official capacity that are told not to say anything negative is extraordinary. Like they're told not to say anything that might impact the economy or jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a serious problem. It needs work. Oh no! Don't say that. So now we've got a situation where we're right up against the point where we can't ignore the problem. Our existing set of problem solving won't work, and we've now got to sort of come up with something else in a knee-jerk fashion kind of way, while pointing the finger at someone else and saying, "Yeah, it's his fault." Yeah. Okay, guys, this is why aliens don't talk to us.
Might very well be true. But so let's dig into it.